"Excuse me, sir, but we can't help you here." The words rang out in the lobby like a slap in the face. Every sound in the bank seemed to freeze, the tapping of keyboards, the soft rustle of papers, even the low chatter of customers waiting. Line. All of it died in an instant. The sentence came from the bank manager, a middle-aged woman with a stiff posture and eyes that scanned people with the sharpness of a judge's gavel. She was standing just behind the counter, glaring at the man who had just walked in. That man was Marcus Hayes. Tall, confident, and dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit that spoke of quiet power, Marcus carried himself with the calm presence of someone used to commanding rooms filled with executives. He had arrived that morning with a simple task: to open a new corporate account in preparation for a massive expansion deal. Nothing extraordinary, nothing complicated. Just ordinary business. But to the people in that lobby, it suddenly didn't look so simple. Because Marcus was black, and in the eyes of the manager, that was all that mattered. The tension hit like static electricity. Marcus blinked once, surprised, though his face remained composed. He had heard this tone before, dismissive, clipped, carrying the kind of authority that doesn't come from rules or policy, but from prejudice. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" he asked evenly, giving the manager a chance to correct herself, to realize the weight of her words. But instead of backtracking, she doubled down. "We don't handle those kinds of accounts for individuals like yourself," she said, stressing. The last words in a way that made a woman in the waiting area shift uncomfortably in her chair. A young man in line looked up from his phone, raising his eyebrows. A teller at the far counter pretended to focus on paperwork, but kept sneaking glances at Marcus. The security guard near the door adjusted his belt, his body language suggesting he was ready to step in if told. The entire room seemed to be waiting for Marcus to either explode in anger or walk out in defeat. But Marcus did neither. He stood still, his expression calm, his eyes sharp. Years of experience had taught him the power of silence, of letting others reveal who they truly were when given the chance. Inside, though, there was a storm. He had built himself from nothing, climbed out of neighborhoods where opportunities were scarce, faced rejection after rejection until he forced the world to notice his brilliance. And yet, even at the peak of his success, as the CEO of one of the fastest-growing financial companies in the country, he was still being judged by the color of his skin before a single word about his credentials had been spoken. "I would like to speak to someone about a corporate account," he repeated calmly, his voice steady, his presence undeniable. "Perhaps a regional officer or senior staff member?" The manager didn't flinch. She crossed her arms as though she were shutting a door that should never have been opened. "Sir, I'm going to ask you to leave now. We reserve the right to refuse service." The sentence hung in the air like a threat. Customers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some looked down at their shoes, unwilling to get involved. A few glanced at Marcus with sympathy, but none spoke up. The staff behind the counters kept their heads low, avoiding the confrontation. Not one person moved to challenge the manager. Not one person questioned why a man dressed in a suit that probably cost more than their monthly salary was being treated like a criminal simply for asking for service. Marcus exhaled slowly, glancing down at the Rolex on his wrist. 7 minutes, he thought. That was all the time he was going to give them. 7 minutes to show who they were, to either stand for fairness or expose themselves completely. He had been patient for years, but patience had its limits. The manager, misreading his silence as compliance, gave a small nod to the guard. The guard straightened, ready to escort Marcus out. That was when Marcus lifted his head again, his eyes locking on the manager's with a calmness that was almost unnerving. "Are you sure you want to do this?" he asked softly, his tone carrying the weight of something much larger than the moment. The question wasn't loud, it wasn't aggressive, but it was powerful enough that even the customers felt the shift in the room. Something about the way Marcus spoke, controlled, precise, and confident, made it clear he was not the kind of man anyone should underestimate. The manager blinked, clearly thrown off by the question, but she recovered quickly, masking her discomfort with a tight smile. Yes, I'm sure. Now please leave. Marcus nodded slowly as if confirming something to himself. He glanced once more at his watch. Only 2 minutes had passed since he walked through those glass doors. That meant they had 5 minutes left. 5 minutes to prove they were worth their jobs, or 5 minutes to lose everything. And in that lobby, filled with quiet customers, nervous tellers, and one arrogant manager who thought she held all the power, not a single person realized they were about to witness a moment that would change all of their lives forever. Marcus stayed rooted to the floor, his composure so unshakable it almost seemed unnatural. He had faced worse battles than this, and yet, each time it happened, it still burned. He wasn't just being denied service, he was being denied dignity. And for what? For the shade of his skin. For walking into a bank with confidence that the manager couldn't reconcile with her assumptions. The silence between them grew heavier by the second. He noticed every detail, the way the young teller near the far counter nervously tapped her pen against the desk, the way 2 customers whispered to each other with frowns, the way the guard by the door shifted his weight like he was waiting for an excuse to intervene. Everyone could feel the tension, but no one dared to break it. Marcus spoke again, his tone courteous but firm. I don't believe you understand. I am here to open a corporate account. It's a high-value account. You should be happy to have my business. But the manager wasn't listening. Her jaw tightened, and she shook her head in irritation. Sir, you need to leave before I call security. We don't provide accounts of that type without proper references. And I don't believe you qualify. The way she said it wasn't about paperwork or policy. It was about disbelief, about assuming that a black man standing in her lobby could not possibly have the kind of wealth or status to require a corporate-level account. She didn't know his name, didn't bother to ask, didn't think it mattered. In her eyes, he was already out of place. Marcus felt the weight of eyes on him. A teenager waiting with his mother stared openly. A businessman in line adjusted his tie and glanced away, clearly uncomfortable. It wasn't just an interaction anymore. It was a spectacle. People were watching to see if Marcus would push back or quietly accept the insult. He decided to give the room a moment longer, to see if anyone would step in. Would anyone raise a voice? Would any of the employees speak against the blatant discrimination unfolding right in front of them? But there was nothing. Silence. Compliance. The kind of silence that doesn't just make you invisible but makes the offender feel invincible. Marcus's fingers tightened slightly on the handle of his leather briefcase. He could feel the anger rising inside. But years of experience in boardrooms and negotiations had taught him the value of restraint. Exploding in rage would only confirm the stereotypes that people like this manager secretly held. No, he wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. He checked his watch again. Barely 3 minutes had passed. That left 4 minutes before the clock in his head ran out. The manager turned her attention briefly to the guard, gesturing with her chin as if to say, "Do your job." The guard hesitated, clearly uneasy. Something about Marcus's demeanor didn't fit the picture of a man who could be dismissed or thrown out so easily. His presence wasn't just commanding, it was unsettling. "Sir," the guard said, his voice unsure, "maybe you should step outside and come back another time." Marcus looked at him, then back at the manager, and shook his head. "I'm not going anywhere until I get the service I came for, and I strongly suggest you think carefully before you make your next move." The lobby went quiet again. The young teller bit her lip. The businessman in line straightened, sensing the shift, until even the whispering customers stopped talking. Something about Marcus's voice had changed. It wasn't loud, it wasn't aggressive, but it carried a warning that everyone in the room could feel. The manager stiffened, refusing to back down. "We don't serve everyone who walks in off the street, no matter what you claim. If you don't leave now, I'll have to call the regional office and report you." Marcus almost smiled at that. The irony of her threat was staggering. If she only knew who he was, if she had even the slightest clue, she would be begging to handle his account, not threatening him with phone calls. But that was the problem, wasn't it? People like her didn't see beyond their own prejudice. They didn't think they needed to. A couple of customers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One woman, finally unable to contain herself, whispered just loud enough for those around her to hear, "Why is she treating him like that? He hasn't done anything wrong." Marcus caught her words, but he didn't react. He kept his eyes locked on the manager, steady and unyielding. "You're making a mistake," he said softly. "One you won't be able to take back." The manager scoffed. "The only mistake here is you walking in thinking you can demand special treatment." That was it. That was the moment Marcus knew the countdown had ended. Not because his 7 minutes were up, but because the bank had failed the test. They had revealed themselves completely. Their silence, their prejudice, their cowardice. And when people reveal themselves, Marcus had learned, you don't argue with them. You act. He straightened his posture, adjusted his tie, and calmly closed the folder he had opened on the counter. Every move he made was deliberate. Like a man preparing to end a game he already knew he'd won. Inside, he thought of every person who had ever been treated the way he was being treated now. Every person dismissed, denied, or degraded for no reason other than who they were. He wasn't just standing there for himself anymore. He was standing there for them too. The bank staff didn't realize it yet, but the balance of power in that room was about to flip. And when it did, it wouldn't just be one manager who paid the price. It would be every single person who chose silence over courage. The tension in the room had reached its peak. Customers sat stiffly in their chairs, some pretending not to watch while others couldn't look away. The tellers glanced back and forth, their hands frozen above keyboards, unsure whether to type or just keep staring. The guard hovered awkwardly, waiting for clear instructions, and at the center of it all stood Marcus Hayes, calm as stone, watching the seconds tick away on his watch. Then he spoke. His voice wasn't raised, but it carried so much authority that it sliced through the air sharper than a shout ever could. "Before you make another move, before you try to lay a hand on me, there's something you should know." The guard paused mid-step. The manager frowned, annoyed but also slightly rattled by the sudden shift in tone. The customers leaned forward, sensing a change. Marcus slowly set his leather briefcase on the counter, undoing the brass clasp with a quiet click. He opened it and pulled out a sleek folder, the kind executives carry into boardrooms where billions of dollars are at stake. He laid it flat on the counter and flipped it open for everyone nearby to see. At the very top of the stack was a crisp document with his name in bold, Marcus Hayes, Chief Executive Officer, Hayes Financial Holdings. The manager blinked. For the first time that morning, she looked genuinely uncertain. Marcus tapped the page lightly with his finger, his gaze never leaving hers. "This is my signature. These are the contracts that show ownership. And this," he said, sliding another document forward, "proves my company acquired majority shares in this very bank chain 6 months ago. In case you're slow to understand, this branch, this staff, this building, it all falls under my control." Gasps broke out in the lobby. A customer in the back muttered, "Wait, he owns the bank?" Someone else whispered, "No way." The atmosphere shifted in an instant. The guard froze, his authority vanishing as quickly as it had come. The tellers looked at one another in panic, realizing the man they'd ignored, the man they'd silently allowed to be humiliated, wasn't just any customer. He was their boss. The manager's face drained of color. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. For all her posturing, for all her arrogance, she now stood exposed, stripped of her power. Marcus leaned slightly closer, lowering his voice so that every syllable landed like a gavel striking wood. "You refused me service not because of policy, not because of rules. You refused me because of what I look like. And I want you to remember this moment, because in less than 60 seconds, you will no longer work here." The manager stumbled, back, her composure unraveling. Mr. Hayes, I didn't know. If I had realized—" "That's the problem," Marcus interrupted, his tone sharp but steady. "You shouldn't have to know who someone is to treat them with respect. A man off the street deserves dignity. A woman walking in deserves fair treatment. Whether they are rich or poor, dressed in a suit or in work clothes, It should not matter, but it mattered to you, and now it will cost you. The words rolled through the room with the weight of a verdict. The tellers looked sick. The guard quietly shifted to the side, unwilling to even stand near the manager. Customers pulled out their phones, recording the confrontation as though instinct told them this was history in the making. The manager's lips trembled. Please, let's talk about this. We've served this community for years. We didn't mean— You didn't mean, Marcus cut in, his eyes narrowing. You meant every word. You thought you had power here and you used it to belittle me. But here's the truth. You never had power. You only had prejudice, and prejudice crumbles when faced with real authority. Every eye in the lobby was on him now. He stood tall, collected, and in complete control, while the woman who had tried to dismiss him shrank smaller and smaller before him. He closed the folder with a deliberate snap and tucked it back into his briefcase. I gave you 7 minutes. You failed the test. Your time is up. The silence that followed was deafening. Customers exchanged looks, some nodding with quiet approval, others stunned into disbelief. The tellers sat frozen, waiting for his next words as though their futures depended on them, which in fact they did. Marcus straightened his tie and glanced one last time at the manager, who stood trembling, her authority shattered. This branch will operate under new leadership starting today, he said firmly. And you, along with every single person who stood by and said nothing, are done here. The words fell like a hammer. The manager gasped, covering her mouth. The tellers looked stricken. One of them whispered, "We're fired." But Marcus didn't respond. The message was already clear. He picked up his briefcase, turned, and walked toward the door. The crowd of customers parted for him, some whispering in awe, others holding up their phones to capture the moment. Every step he took carried the weight of justice being served, not with shouting, not with chaos, but with undeniable authority. And as he reached the glass doors, Marcus glanced back just once. His gaze swept over the stunned employees, the trembling manager, the silent witnesses. Respect isn't earned by who you know, he said quietly, but loud enough for all to hear. It's shown to everyone, every day. Remember that, because your jobs depended on it. Then he walked out, leaving behind a branch that would never forget the morning it discovered who really held the power. The silence that settled after Marcus's declaration was unlike anything the bank had ever known. It wasn't the calm hush of a lobby where people quietly waited their turn. No, this was the heavy, suffocating silence of people realizing their world had just tilted upside down. Every pair of eyes in the room remained fixed on him, stunned, wide, and disbelieving. The manager's legs wobbled and she grabbed onto the counter for balance. Her face, once so smug, looked pale and fragile now, like porcelain ready to crack. She stammered, "Mr. Hayes, we can make this right. Please, I can explain." Marcus didn't even glance at her. He adjusted his cufflinks with the calm precision of a man who had already made up his mind. "No explanation can undo what you've done. You've shown me who you are. You've shown everyone in this room." The words landed like stones. The customers shifted uncomfortably, but many of them nodded silently. They had seen every second of the confrontation. They knew the truth. The manager had treated Marcus with open disdain, had dismissed him, had called security on him, all because she had assumed he didn't belong. Marcus turned slightly, scanning the row of tellers behind the counter. Their faces told the story before their mouths could. Some looked sick with guilt, others terrified for their jobs. But not one of them had spoken up when it mattered. Not one had dared to challenge their manager's behavior. "You're all complicit," Marcus said firmly, his voice echoing in the quiet lobby. "Not because you said the words, but because you stayed silent. Silence in the face of discrimination is agreement, and agreement makes you part of the problem." A teller near the end of the counter raised a trembling hand, her voice breaking. As she whispered, "I didn't know what to do. I wanted to speak, but—" Marcus stopped her with a single look. Courage doesn't wait for permission. If you had the chance to do what's right and you chose fear instead, then you made your choice. The teller's hand dropped slowly. She lowered her head, tears pooling in her eyes. The customers were no longer trying to look away. Some were recording openly, holding their phones high, eager to capture every word. A few even applauded quietly, as if recognizing the rare sight of someone in power refusing to let injustice slide. A young woman whispered to her friend, "This is going viral. You can't buy a moment like this." The manager tried again, desperation dripping from every syllable. "Please, Mr. Hayes, I didn't mean any harm. It was a misunderstanding. We've worked here for years. We serve this community. Please reconsider." Marcus's gaze flicked. To her, sharp and unforgiving. Years of service mean nothing when you can't offer a single moment of respect. You didn't misunderstand me. You judged me. You made a decision before I spoke a full sentence, and the worst part? You thought no one would ever hold you accountable. She opened her mouth to argue, but no words came. She looked around helplessly, as though hoping her staff or even the customers might step in to defend her, but no one did. The silence told her everything she needed to know. Marcus's words cut through the air again, steady and final. "Your career ends today. All of you. Effective immediately." Gasps broke out. One of the tellers whispered, "He can't really do that, can he?" Another hissed back, "He owns the bank. He can do anything he wants." The guard, who had once been ready to escort Marcus out, now stood like a statue, head bowed, as though wishing he could vanish. He knew better than to intervene now. The atmosphere shifted again, this time to something electric. Customers, once silent spectators, now realized they were witnessing a reckoning far larger than a simple refusal of service. This was about power, being stripped from those who abused it, about accountability arriving when it was least expected. Some clapped quietly, the sound building like raindrops on glass. One older man muttered, "About time someone called them out." Another customer, phone in hand, whispered, "This is history. He just flipped the whole place upside down." Marcus stood tall, letting their whispers wash over him. But he didn't need their applause. His focus was on the people who had failed the test. "Respect is not optional in my companies," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "It is the foundation, and anyone who cannot live by that value has no place here." The manager's eyes filled with tears. "Please. I have a family. So does every person you've disrespected without a second thought," Marcus interrupted coldly. "I built my success on integrity. I won't allow people like you to poison it." He snapped his briefcase shut, the metallic click echoing in the silent lobby. He gave one final glance to the staff, each of them pale, horrified, and speechless, and then turned toward the doors. The moment his polished shoes touched the marble floor, the customers moved aside, parting for him like he was a general leaving the battlefield. Phones followed his every step, recording what would soon spread across the internet like wildfire. As he reached the glass doors, he paused, his back still to the stunned staff. Without turning around, he spoke one last time. "Remember this day. Respect costs nothing, but a lack of it can cost you everything." Then he pushed the doors open and stepped out into the daylight, leaving behind a branch filled with shattered careers, trembling employees, and the unmistakable knowledge that they had just witnessed their own downfall, delivered in less than 7 minutes by the very man they had underestimated. When Marcus stepped out of the bank's glass doors, the sunlight hit him like a spotlight. Behind him, through the glass, the stunned faces of the staff lingered, pale and trembling. But outside, the world was already shifting. A small crowd of customers who had followed the scene walked out after him, their voices buzzing with disbelief and admiration. Some shook their heads in shock, others murmured about how incredible it was to see justice unfold in real time. One young man holding up his phone whispered to his friend, "I got the whole thing, every second. This is going to blow up online." And he wasn't wrong. Within minutes, clips of Marcus's calm but devastating takedown began appearing on social media. By the time he reached his car, notifications were already pinging across the internet. Videos with captions like "Black CEO owns racist bank manager" and 7 minutes that changed everything were spreading faster than wildfire. Marcus slid into the back seat of his sleek black sedan, his driver closing the door behind him. As the car pulled away, he stared out the window, watching the city pass by. For a moment, he allowed himself a deep breath. He had kept his composure inside, but he couldn't deny the heaviness pressing on his chest. It wasn't just about him. It was about how many others had endured the same treatment without the power to fight back. By the time he reached his corporate headquarters, his phone was vibrating nonstop. Missed calls, messages, news alerts. Everyone wanted his comment. His assistants rushed to greet him, their faces lit with both worry and excitement. "Mr. Hayes," one said breathlessly, "you're all over the news. That video, it's already at 1 million views." Marcus raised an eyebrow. 1 million? Across multiple platforms, the assistant confirmed. "They're calling it the 7-minute showdown." Marcus gave a small, humorless smile. He didn't crave the attention, but he understood its power. Stories like this weren't just news, they were catalysts. They could spark conversations, shift perspectives, maybe even force institutions to confront their biases. And if his story could do that, then it was worth every uncomfortable second in that bank. Later that evening, Marcus stood in the main auditorium of his headquarters, facing a room filled with employees. Cameras were set up at the back. The world was watching. The video had gone viral, but people wanted to hear from him directly. They wanted to know what he thought, what he felt, and what he planned to do next. He stepped up to the podium, his presence commanding, his voice calm but filled with conviction. "Today I walked into one of our own branches, not as the CEO, not as the man who signs the paychecks. I walked in as a customer, as a black man looking for service, and I was denied, not because of policy, not because of paperwork, but because of prejudice." The room was silent. Every word felt heavy, deliberate. I could have shouted, I could have caused a scene, but instead, I chose to let them reveal themselves, and in 7 minutes, they did. They showed the world what happens when people think their prejudice is more powerful than their responsibility to serve with respect. He paused, scanning the room, making eye contact with his employees. "I fired them, every single one, and I would do it again without hesitation. Because respect is not optional. It is not a courtesy we extend only to those who look like us or dress like us or remind us of ourselves. Respect is the foundation of every business, every relationship, every community. Without it, everything crumbles." Applause broke out, loud and passionate. Some employees even stood to their feet. But Marcus raised a hand, signaling for quiet. "This isn't about me. It's about every person who has ever been dismissed, belittled, or denied dignity because of who they are. It's about making sure that in our company, in our institutions, in our communities, no one ever has to wonder if they'll be treated fairly. That is the standard. That is the promise." His words were carried live on television and across streaming platforms, watched by millions. Social media lit up with praise, calling him a leader who had not only exposed injustice, but taken decisive action against it. Critics debated whether firing the entire staff was too harsh, but the overwhelming consensus was clear. Marcus Hayes had struck a chord. In the days that followed, the bank issued official statements. The parent company announced mandatory diversity and respect training across all branches, acknowledging the incident had revealed serious flaws. Journalists wrote op-eds praising Marcus for holding people accountable in real time, without hiding behind press releases or committees. Customers flocked online to share their own stories of being treated unfairly at banks, restaurants, offices. Marcus's 7 minutes had ignited a movement larger than anyone expected. But for Marcus, the lesson was simple. One evening, after the whirlwind of media interviews and corporate meetings, he sat alone in his office staring at the city lights outside his window. He thought about how close the manager had come to erasing his identity down to nothing more than a stereotype. And he thought about the millions of people who didn't have a camera to capture their humiliation or the power to respond with authority. He whispered to himself, almost like a vow. Not on my watch. The video would continue to circulate. The story retold countless times. But to Marcus, it wasn't about fame or headlines. It was about setting a standard that could not be ignored. Respect everyone, or lose everything. Because sometimes it only takes 7 minutes to reveal the truth. And when the truth comes, it has the power to shake the world.